When we get home, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to find this boy's proper family.
Oh, he hasn't got any, not around here anyway.
Yeah, I do.
Oh.
Walking. 166, take one.
Action!
Stop it!
All right, Todd. It's over. Don't believe him, Your Grace. You don't know him the way that I do.
I sense the presence of Jor-El here. We will destroy this place. And then kill him.
As an old-time production person, I personally didn't think it was a very good idea trying to shoot two films at the same time. I personally think you're better to concentrate on one film, make that, and then go on and do the second film, and using some of the resources that you'd used in one. Whereas they felt it was easier to shoot scenes from one and two in the same place at the same time. And in the end, you get yourself into a bit of a bugger's muddle doing that.
It was a continuing saga, the way Tom and I looked at it, that if you're doing one, hell, just as easy to do two, it's just that much more footage. One would lead into two, and for those that didn't see one, we would have a prequel.
There's form and the substance. The form in making the two pictures together was substance, because they were saying, we are going to be an event. It signaled that. You had to make sure that they both worked. So that risk was taken, but what it gave to the momentum of the project was a sense of certainty, a sense of momentum, a sense of daring do. This was unique. And so I think that challenge that they met gave it that quality.
It presented production problems, but actually we were smart enough to do was, every time we had a set, like Fortress of Solitude, we tried to do everything in that for both pictures. So once you were done with that set and those actors, you were done. You never had to go back. So in that way, we did one and two together.
The crew on Superman, the English crew, were so dedicated, so professional. Everybody in every category knew the story, knew the script.
When I did The Omen, there was one of four great cameramen I wanted to work with. The first one was Jeff Unsworth, and he was not available. So when this one came along, I immediately called Jeff Unsworth and I said, would you like to do a movie about Superman? He said, oh, I'd love to. Who is he? I said, it's the comic book artist thing. And he said, oh. So we came in and met, and we told him our approach, and he came on board right away.
Well, Jeff Unsworth was the light and cameraman. He's lovely, God rest him. I mean, I've done 2 or 3 films with him before. I mean, real old school. Lovely man. Very, very crafted in his talent. No digital work, all film, all graded, at the labs on rushes, and completely relied on filters and the right stop and the right stock, and the traditional way as to how you'd photograph something.
Jeffrey was a very daring, brave cameraman as well as a very good cameraman. And if you see the Krypton sequence, all the actors were in 3M material, reflective material, which means you could actually burn them right off the screen. So the bravery of what he did then, because you have the Soul Kinds pay an absolute fortune for Marlon to come on, and almost taking him off the screen with the daringness of photography took a lot of courage.
You will travel far, my little Cologne.
When I saw Star Wars, John Barry had done that. I met with him immediately, and he was a wonderful character. Walked in with a presentation that was extraordinary, a book of crystals, to see who would have been part of a life of a crystal, and therefore how would Fortress of Solitude come to be, and he was way ahead of it.
John, in a way, was asked to come along and get it together for, I seem to remember it was something like 6 weeks off shooting, so there was just that sort of time scale. I remember spending an awful lot of time on that Krypton set, because there's just the sheer scale of it, Doing those sort of things, because there's no yardstick to compare it to something else that's previously been done, you almost have to be there and say, you know, it should be like this or like that or whatever. And it's really an instinctive thing that you hope sort of works, really. I mean, it's a huge spectrum. I like to think that, you know, John sort of pulled it off, really.
A lot of people in America didn't believe that it was made, that they were made in England. They thought they were American films, which is a marvellous compliment to the art department, the directors and everybody involved, and indeed English film. It was everyone, and all of the vehicles and telephones and posters and advertising were all imported from America.
It was like retrofitting it. It was getting everybody to figure out how we did some of the shots first. Therefore, what technically you had to invent to do it, and at what order you had to do it. That was the logic behind the schedule.
When I took over, they told me it's going to be fairly easy for you because we've been in pre-production for a long period of time. I said, the most important thing is let me see your flying, because if I couldn't convince an audience that this flying was real, you didn't have a movie. Then you went back to a TV show where he jumped out the window and he was on a board and you could see it. So when they showed me their tests, he jumped out of a window and he was on a board. I said, you guys are kidding.
And on the first day of the flying, we were all there assembled. We were going to see, you know, what we were going to be doing. And they had the team of guys who did the flying in the Peter Pan pantomime. They kind of hooked up a guy, and there was 3 guys with a rope, and they pulled the rope, and the actor went up in the air. And I remember looking at Donna and seeing Donna's face, and he said, "That's it." Then we knew we were in trouble.
It was an absolute nightmare to make the man fly. And a fortune, absolute fortune to get there.
You just can't give the special effects department, by that I mean all of the effects, too much credit for the most unbelievable job, because they were doing things that just had not been done on screen before. I mean, I have no idea how they went about their work, except for the fact that it was like the Wright brothers. No one had ever made anybody fly on screen successfully. So, and no one had any idea 3 months before the picture how he was going to fly. And he flew green screen, black screen, blue screen. There was a little bit of animation. He was on wires. He was in gimbals that were very sophisticated. But 90% of the stuff was invented for the movie.
And in the early days, we had little models of Superman. We were firing out of cannons across the lawn at Shepperton Studios. I did lots of flying tests. We even tried flying upside down. All sorts of innovative things like that were tried and tested.
Because we were quite desperate at the time, you know. We hadn't really figured out how to make it most effectively. Yeah, we could do it, but we really wanted to avoid the sort of visible tricks. We wanted to be smooth.
I came up with a system for making things fly, using 2 interlock zoom lenses. Christopher Reeve would be basically in one place on a pole arm that's pushed through the screen that you don't see, and he's there. And all he does is sort of make the moves, and it's the camera and the projector that make him look like he comes straight up. Besides that, you can rotate and you know, pan and tilt and do all that sort of stuff in addition.
Chris had immense patience, because, I mean, sticking the harness on a guy and hanging you by the parts that aren't too comfortable for many hours at a time, and him holding the pose and keeping his composure, and then still having to actually act and react to something at the end of it all, you know, it's a technique. I mean, he had it down perfectly.
I thought the flying was so dumb. I thought there was no way this was going to work. So I just thought, we're flying around, and Donner'd say, now you're going past the Statue of Liberty, and whoop-de-doo was what I thought. There was a lot of things during the flying scene that really tested one's confidence in the scene itself, where I didn't think it was going to work at all.
Nowadays, when you see a man fly, hey, you want to see a man fly, you can fly. But in those days, you had to do it, and it was major thought process production. It narrowed down to a group of physical working people, not computers. But in those days, you had to do those things, and they were touchable, and they were unreal. We saw Christopher Reeve fly for the first time in dailies, that it worked after a year and a half of trying to get it to work. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. I mean, he flew. He actually flew. It was amazing.
Good evening, Warden. I think these 2 men should be safe here with you now till they can get a fair trial.
Who is it, Superman? Lex Luthor.
There weren't too many odd things, difficult things that I had to really, break down on. It was much more the normal makeups. But there were times when I had to really be on the ball too. Gene Hackman would come in, I got to put a ball cap on him. And over the years I'd done ball caps and changing them, developing them, and I found the best system was, strangely enough, was to make it pure white. And then I would put my makeup and stuff on it. And Gene Hackman stood up there, he looked close into me and said, "What are you trying to do? Turn me into a ping pong ball?" He said. Difficult to explain to him, and he was a bit worried. Anyway, I then carried on doing my makeup, and as usual, and it worked. He didn't worry about it after that, but at the time, he seemed like he was quite concerned.
We agreed this would be down, right?
Yes, and I'll go over there in a perfect piece of coordination, raise it, and go out.
We can all go home.
But we take 733.
Donner, he must have been exhausted. I was a young guy. Donner was a young guy as well, but he was in his late 40s at that time. I was in my late 20s. And now I know, having directed some movies myself, what the exhaustion of shooting a movie, let alone trying to cope with 5 units. And absolutely, as Dick, this was the great opportunity of his life. This was I know he felt this was like manna from heaven to have such a subject which he felt he was perfect for. So Donner was taking all this pressure. He was coming into the rushes in the morning and looking at with me, but there were 5 units. So some mornings I would have 3 hours of rushes, maybe. So it became a real log jam. I just didn't realize under what real pressure he was under.
Mr. Salkind was, with it all, a very smart man. And he came from a family of very well-known producers. I don't think he or his son or Spengler, one of their producers, all these people, I don't think they had any concept of what the film would be. As far as I'm concerned, their sole interest was, how do we make it cheaper? And we would come up with these ideas, but it would be an important idea that you had to be able to execute here. I'd say, go do it, and then they would say no, but my people would go, and this went on for a million things.
God rest his soul, my father, Alexander Salkind, was breathing very hard on my neck. And I would go on the set, I would just stand there to, put more pressure. But it was horrible.
It got so bad, I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't stand the sight of them, quite honestly. And I'd just, stay away from me. Stay off the goddamn set.
I'm sure I came up with the idea there, that I said, well, why don't we hire Lester, who we have a very good friendship with Musketeers, and actually I think we even considered him at one point to direct it, because he will be like another producer, and being a director, okay, let's face the worst. If everything really goes bad, perhaps he can take over.
He came on the set one day and he said, Dick, he introduced, and I said, listen, he said, I'm here to be a go-between. Nothing more than if you have something to say to them, say it to me and I'll tell them. If they have something to say to you, they'll tell me. He said, I'll help you any way I can if you need me. I said, look, I don't need you in the process of making the film, but that's great because I really don't want to be involved with these people.
But it made for an uncomfortable situation, obviously more uncomfortable for Dick than anybody, knowing that a director, especially one of Richard Lester's quality, was sitting there, but nobody knew if Alexander Salkind was going to fire Dick Donner, then where were they going to be?
It must have been a blow to him, because essentially what it was a sort of Damocles hanging over his head that he could be fired, because directors can be fired. Don't forget, this isn't a studio picture, this is run by the Salkinds.
Donner protected us from a lot. And he was an actor, and he knows that that's not something you pass on. So we knew this was going on in the background, and you couldn't miss that there was tension between the Salkinds and Pierre Spengler and everybody else. I mean, everybody else. It wasn't just Donner.
There were lots of things going on in the background and lots of confusions, but Dick in his own way was the one who's kind of weaved it together, and he had a kind of tight group around him, like Jeffrey Unsworth, David Tomlin, assistant director, Stuart, the editor, myself. So it was a nice group around him that kind of guided it through. And I must admit, because Jeffrey Unsworth died before he never saw the film, and we had quite a few showings for execs and that. It never seemed to be a happy experience.
We reached a given point where we had finished everything with Brando and Hackman, and we realized that if we were going to make the date, which was originally summer, but was getting tough to make that, we had to concentrate on one.
Warner said to Dick and said to me, the most spectacular effect in either picture is Superman turning the world backwards, which was the original end of Superman 2. Is there a way to put it on to the end of Superman 1? Because if Superman 1 isn't a hit, if this is a colossal disaster, there may not be a Superman 2. And so I had to try and construct the plot in such a way so that the end of 2 became the end of 1. The original end of 1 was Superman getting rid of those deadly missiles, and he threw one into space, and it just kept going and going and going, and hit the imprisoned 3 supervillains and released them. And they all yelled, "Free, free," and they're heading toward Earth, and it said they will return in Superman 2. So that ending was scrapped of 1, and we put turning the world backwards in.
Having worked with Jerry Goldsmith, and then he got an Academy Award on The Omen, and we were very close friends. When I got into this picture, I immediately called Jerry and I said, "I'd love to have you do the score." He said, "I'd love to." So we had a date set, but as the picture prolonged itself, I lost Jerry. And I said, "Oh God, why?" I said, "I'd love to go with John Williams. I wonder if we can get him." Called John Williams, sent him the script. He called, he said, "I'd love to do it." I said, "Oh, great." I had John Williams in a date, but then we lost him because we went past that date. We wouldn't be able to got Jerry back. I said, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. And then when we just found out we were going to go for Christmas and we were going to be that much later, I lost Jerry again. Those guys were doing pictures back to back, and I got John Williams.
One of the most exciting things about doing film music for me is the opportunity that we can have for creating an original music for a character, as in the case of Superman, that had even been with us for decades, but that isn't yet identified musically. And we have the challenge of being able to do that if we can do it. Certainly speaking for myself, it's a difficult thing to do because the musical identification needs to be accessible and very direct. If it was something obtuse or very complicated or difficult to get one's ear and mind around it, it probably wouldn't work as well. I'm delighted that Superman is identified by the music from the film and not from the radio or this or the comic strips for whatever reason. I don't think it had music that, at least that I know or remember.
You're a dreamer, Lex Luthor. A sick, twisted dreamer. Your plan couldn't possibly work.
I'll admit there were a few problems, which, by the way, is target 0 right here.
Ooh. Got it.
This picture never had a preview. Never had a preview. We had a rough cut, and I wanted to run that continuity with an audience to find out, hey, am I anywhere near where I should be? Is the audience going to be happy? Have I not told something? So we arranged to have a preview in the United States, and we got a telephone call, and they said, come into Warner's, we got to talk to you. And I came in and I said, look, we got a problem. Salkinds won't release that print. They won't bring it to this country. I said, why not? According to them, they think you can print the picture off this rough cut. I said, you can't print off this. We have to have the negative. The negative is back there. They said they will not bring it over. And I was fit to be tied. It was impossible. So I never had a preview. I had to go back to England and put the picture together as is, never showing it to anybody.
The first time I saw Superman, we were in Washington, D.C. I think it was President Carter who saw the first one, and Amy was there. That was pretty fun. I took my mom. The Shrivers had a party. That was pretty good. I think maybe then I started realizing how big this thing was.
That's the first audience that saw the picture. It was just about as scary as it gets. But I had an incredible thing happen. Siegel and Schuster were invited to the premiere. And at the end of the premiere, they both came over and just thanked me profusely and was crying, and I got caught up in it. And then they all said, would you please come to this room? And I walked in the room, and there's all the Warner Brothers executives. And there was the original statue of Superman, a bronze, done in 1936 or 39. And they were giving it to me. It was the most moving moment I think I've ever had in the business and will ever have, except when my wife said she'd marry me.
I was not in any way prepared for being in a global hit. It's a real shock to go from being anonymous to suddenly being recognized everywhere you go is really a rude awakening. Chris handled it very well. I didn't handle it well at all. It really messed with my head, and I wasn't prepared at all.
The day the movie premiered, I got a phone call from Mark McClure, and he says, Jeff, they looped your voice. And as an actor, you got to realize that hurts when you hear that. And when I went to the party at Donner's house after the LA premiere, he came up and apologized to me. And I said, well, you know, I think you owe me an apology. I guess what happened was Chris was concerned, as well as the producers, this is according to Chris, that my voice was deeper than his and they would notice the difference. But once Donner talked to me and once Chris talked to me, I got over it. But it had nothing to do with Chris and I not getting along. It had nothing to do with, you know, anything negative. It was to better the film. And if that's the case, then that's the whole idea of art. That's the idea of making the film. Then go for it.
Dick Donner was a filmmaker. He knew it from films like The Omen and other films he had done. He knew that the heart of storytelling was to invest yourselves in the character and the narrative. And he never took his eye off of that. He never let the frosting of the sets and the design, even the special effects, overwhelm the story. And that's what he kept center stage. And that's why it was successful. If it was the other way around, it might have been a good trailer, but it wouldn't have been a good movie.
I was very, very, very proud of the picture, and not in its size and the fact that it was the #1 for Winners or any of that stuff. The fact that we pulled this off, that an audience sat in that theater and they got the same charge I did when I sat in Daly's and I saw Christopher Reeve fly from one end of the stage to the other, and people went, oh, they just sucked in their breath. And it was very fulfilling.